Hey guys, tonight we're diving deep, far beneath the humid jungle floor, into a world most people can barely imagine. You are going to feel the oppressive darkness, the damp earth pressing in, and the chilling echoes of a forgotten war. Imagine yourself, just for a moment, squeezed into a space so tight you can barely breathe, surrounded by the smell of damp soil and the distant murmur of unseen dangers. You probably won't survive this journey unscathed, but you'll certainly gain a new perspective on human ingenuity and resilience. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now down in the comments. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Our story begins not with the roar of jets or the thud of artillery, but with the quiet scrape of hose against dirt in the late 1940s. You see, the French colonialists, remember them? They were trying to hold on to Vietnam with a firm grip, but the Vietnamese people, particularly the Viet Minh independence fighters, had other ideas. You find yourself in the dense rubber plantations and rice paddies northwest of what was then Saigon, now the bustling Ho Chi Minh City. This was the Cu Chi district, a seemingly unremarkable patch of land that would soon become legendary. Back then, the tunnels weren't the intricate, multi layered mazes you might imagine. They were, frankly, a bit more rustic. Picture simple, individual hideouts, often just a few meters long, dug by farmers and villagers. You're talking about basic foxholes, really, designed for a quick escape from French patrols or aerial strafing. They were born out of pure necessity. When the French would sweep through a village, searching for Viet Minh sympathizers or supplies, you'd quickly disappear into these earthen burrows, sometimes staying for hours, holding your breath, hoping they wouldn't notice that oddly placed clump of leaves. It was the original duck and cover, but with more mud and less fanfare. This rudimentary beginning highlights a mainstream historical fact. The Cu Chi tunnels began as a localized response to French colonial aggression, not as part of a grand, pre planned military strategy. These were farmers, not engineers, digging with whatever tools they had, often just hoes, shovels, and their bare hands. The excavated earth? You can almost smell the damp soil. It was carefully carried away in baskets, then scattered, often under the cover of night, in nearby bomb craters or fields, disguising any trace of their subterranean activity. It was like trying to hide a massive molehill, but with far higher stakes than just your prize winning petunias. Now, here's a quirky tidbit you might not expect. The very soil of Cu Chi, a type of laterite, played a huge, unsung hero in the tunnel's creation. You see, it's soft enough to dig with simple hand tools when wet, but once it's exposed to air, it actually hardens, becoming incredibly stable and resistant to collapse. It's almost as if the earth itself was conspiring with the Vietnamese resistance. No wonder they called it the Iron Triangle. The ground was literally working for them. If only my garden soil did that. Historians still argue whether the initial scattered tunnel segments were part of any coherent, long term vision or if they truly just evolved organically from isolated acts of self preservation. Some scholars suggest there was always a subtle understanding that these small holes could one day connect, a kind of collective unconscious design. Others believe it was pure, desperate improvisation, gradually linking up only when the conflict escalated and the need for a larger network became undeniable. Either way, you're witnessing the very first whispers of what would become an underground legend. As the French influence waned and the American presence began to swell in the mid 1950s, the strategic importance of the Cu Chi district became undeniably clear. Located just about 70 kilometers northwest of Saigon, it sat squarely on vital supply routes and infiltration corridors into the capital. It was a thorn in the side of any force trying to control South Vietnam, and those little, individual bolt holes, they started to look like prime real estate for a much grander project. The idea of linking them, of creating a continuous, hidden pathway, began to take root in the minds of the National Liberation Front, the NLF, or as the Americans called them, the Viet Cong. You can almost hear the gears turning, the realization dawning. What if we just kept digging? This was more than just digging for shelter. It was digging for survival, for connection, for control. The early Cu Chi tunnels were not just about avoiding capture. They were about creating a resilient base, a hidden lifeline for a guerrilla force facing a technologically superior enemy. You are watching the very first Earth being moved for what would become an invisible subterranean artery pumping lifeblood into the heart of the resistance. It's like building the world's most complicated ant farm, but instead of sugar, the ants are moving weapons and planning ambushes, and you're about to see just how much bigger that ant farm got. As the 1950s bled into the 1960s, you witness a dramatic shift in the landscape of Vietnam, and crucially, in the very earth beneath your feet, in Cu Chi. The French were gone, but a new, far more formidable adversary was arriving, the Americans, with their helicopters, their massive bombing campaigns, and their seemingly endless supply of resources. The nature of the conflict transformed. This escalation wasn't just a challenge, it was an urgent imperative for the NLF. Those isolated hidey holes from the French era, they were no longer enough. The simple act of survival now demanded something far more complex, more extensive, more subterranean. So you see the quiet, determined expansion begin. This wasn't a military engineering project executed by trained professionals with blueprints. This was a grassroots effort, a collective undertaking by entire communities. Every man, woman, and even child played a role. You're not just watching, you're feeling the rhythm of the work. You grasp a shovel, or perhaps just a small basket, and begin to dig. The earth is damp, cloying, but surprisingly yielding. You scrape away soil, filling your basket, then pass it down a line of eager hands. The dirt is then meticulously carried away, often under the cloak of night, to be dumped into bomb craters, camouflaged amongst rice paddies, or even scattered on distant paths to avoid detection from the ever present surveillance planes. The goal: leave no trace, no telltale mound of fresh earth that would betray their hidden world. This period marks a crucial, mainstream historical fact. The Ku Chi tunnels expanded dramatically from rudimentary shelters into an intricate, multi-layered system primarily in response to the escalating American military presence and their superior firepower. The sheer volume of earth moved was staggering. Imagine trying to dig a network of tunnels hundreds of kilometers long with just hand tools. It's like digging the entire London Underground. But instead of professional engineers and massive, boring machines, you've got people with garden spades. It's truly a testament to sheer willpower, or perhaps pure stubbornness. As the tunnels grew, so did their ambition. They weren't just for hiding anymore. You find yourself moving through newly dug sections that are surprisingly purpose-built. There are tiny sleeping chambers, little nooks carved out of the earth where you could try to snatch a few hours of sleep. You see crude kitchens, cleverly designed with smoke vents that snaked upwards through several layers of earth and exited far away from the main tunnel, often disguised as anthills or termite mounds. This quirky tidbit about the smoke vents really highlights the level of detail and ingenuity. Imagine trying to cook rice and not having your dinner smoke give away your position. It's the original low emissions cooking, though probably not for the planet. You also encounter makeshift hospitals, tiny clinics where the wounded could be treated in relative safety, and even command centers where plans were hatched and orders disseminated. The tunnels became literal underground cities, bustling with activity, a hidden world beneath the very feet of the American forces who were desperately trying to locate and destroy the elusive Viet Cong. This underground world allowed NLF cadres to live, train, and operate almost directly under major U.S. bases, a constant, irritating thorn in the side of the larger, more powerful military. Historians still argue whether the comprehensive plan for linking these disparate tunnels into a truly enormous network emerged organically over time, or if there was a centralized, visionary leadership guiding every shovel stroke from the outset. Some scholars suggest it was a decentralized, almost viral growth, with local cells connecting their sections for practical reasons. Others believe a strategic directive from higher echelons saw the potential for a vast, interconnected warren that could revolutionize guerrilla warfare. What you witness, regardless of the exact planning origins, is an undeniable evolution from necessity to tactical masterpiece. The challenges you face during this expansion are immense. The risk of collapse is ever present, especially during the rainy season when the ground becomes saturated. You learn to brace sections with timber, if available, or simply rely on the amazing self-hardening property of the laterite soil. Then there's the constant fear of detection. Every sound, every vibration from above sends shivers down your spine. A rumbling tank, the distant chatter of American soldiers, or the unmistakable drone of a B-52 bomber means immediate, silent stillness. You press yourself against the cool earth, holding your breath, your heart hammering a frantic drumbeat against your ribs. Imagine living with that constant paranoia, that feeling of being hunted. It's enough to make anyone a little jumpy. I mean, if you're ever stuck in a tight spot, like a crowded elevator, just remember these guys who called a hole in the ground their home. Gives you some perspective, right? This expansive network wasn't just for shelter or movement, it was a psychological weapon in itself. It allowed the NLF to control vast swathes of territory, to launch surprise attacks, and then to simply vanish, melting back into the earth. It defied conventional warfare, turning the very ground into an accomplice. You are seeing the birth of a legend, a testament to human resilience, and a profound challenge to military might, forged inch by painful inch, under the relentless gaze of an increasingly frustrated enemy. As you press deeper into the Ku Chi tunnels, you begin to appreciate the sheer genius and sometimes the sheer madness of their architectural design. This isn't just a simple hole in the ground, it's a meticulously planned, multi layered labyrinth, a truly subterranean city carved by hand. Imagine an ant farm, but designed by a master tactician with a flair for the dramatic and a deep understanding of defensive warfare. That's what you're crawling through now. The fundamental structure was typically tripartite. You have three main levels descending into the earth, each connected by incredibly narrow, almost claustrophobic vertical shafts. The top level, often just 3 to 4 meters below the surface, was the most frequently used. This is where you find the countless hidden entrances, camouflaged trapdoors, so perfectly blended with the jungle floor you could step right over them without a clue. They're often covered with leaves, dirt, or even termite mounds. It's like a magic trick, but with less glitter and more potential for a very bad day if you step on the wrong spot. Below that, at around 6 to 8 meters, lies the second level. This is where things get more serious. You discover larger chambers, crude but functional, used for sleeping, storing supplies, or even as small command posts. And then, the deepest level, often 12 meters or more down, a true sanctuary. These were designed to withstand the heaviest bombs, a last resort for protection during intense aerial bombardments. Imagine a bomb dropping from thousands of feet, and you're just chilling in your underground bunker, hoping for the best. Talk about living on the edge. A mainstream historical fact about these tunnels is their incredible length. The total network eventually stretched over an estimated 250 kilometers, about 155 miles, roughly the distance from London to Paris if you were to walk. That's not just a few tunnels, it's an underground highway system connecting villages, supply depots, and fighting positions across a massive area. You could literally walk from one district to another, entirely underground, emerging miles away from where you entered, completely undetected. It defied all conventional military logic of the time. The entrances themselves were a work of art in camouflage. You have to really look. They were incredibly small, often just barely big enough for a slender Vietnamese person to squeeze through, making them almost impossible for a larger American soldier to navigate. You see the ingenuity in their construction. The trapdoors were made of wood, reinforced with earth, and covered with vegetation that perfectly matched the surrounding jungle. Even the hinges were often made from rubber from old tires, making them virtually soundless. It was a perfect blend of natural materials and cunning design. Here's a quirky tidbit about the air supply. How did they breathe down there? You'd think with all those people and all that cooking, it would be a suffocation chamber. Well, they utilized a system of hidden air vents, often disguised as termite mounds or hollowed out tree stumps. These vents were incredibly narrow and dispersed over a wide area, making them almost impossible to detect from above. It's the original natural ventilation system, though I doubt it came with a fancy brochure or an energy efficiency rating. Historians still argue whether the complexity and extensiveness of the ventilation shafts were entirely planned from the start, or if they evolved incrementally as the need for fresh air became more pressing with the expansion and prolonged habitation of the tunnels. Beyond the living quarters and command centers, you encounter specialized chambers. There are weapons factories, surprisingly crude but effective workshops where grenades, mines, and even rudimentary firearms were repaired or manufactured. You smell the faint scent of gunpowder and metallic dust. There are also medical aid stations, incredibly cramped spaces where surgeries were performed by lamplight, the air thick with the smell of antiseptic and fear. You even find small, almost spiritual altars, little spaces for reflection and hope amidst the constant peril. Every element of the tunnel system was designed with defense in mind. Many sections were equipped with false tunnels and dead ends, leading unsuspecting enemy soldiers into deadly booby traps. Some parts were even flooded, forcing intruders to retreat. The tunnels also had ingenious rest stations, small, elevated platforms where a person could sit or recline, allowing the precious air to circulate beneath them in the typically humid environment. It wasn't exactly luxury, but it was a fleeting moment of relief in an otherwise grueling existence. You realize that building these tunnels wasn't just about digging, it was about engineering for survival against a technologically superior foe. It was about creating a defensive shield, a strategic weapon, and a hidden home all at once. The sheer scale and intricate detail of this subterranean world are truly mind boggling. It's like looking at a termite mound and realizing it's actually a five-star hotel with a hidden arms depot. And you, my friend, are currently checking in. Just try not to touch anything with your tongue. Having marveled at the sheer architectural genius of the Ku Chai tunnels, you now find yourself experiencing the daily grind of life deep within their earthen embrace. Forget your spacious living room, your comfortable bed, or even a simple window with a view. Here, every breath is a conscious effort, every movement cramped, and the sun is a distant memory. This isn't just a place to hide, it's a world where entire lives were lived, for years on end, under the constant threat of discovery. Imagine waking up, not to an alarm clock, but to the gentle drip of moisture from the tunnel ceiling, or the distant rumble of shelling. Your bed? Often a small, raised platform of compacted earth, maybe with a thin mat if you were lucky. The air is thick with humidity and the smell of damp soil, mixed with the faint scent of charcoal smoke from the communal kitchens. Personal space is a luxury you simply don't have. You are living shoulder to shoulder with dozens, sometimes hundreds, of others. It's like the world's most intense, long-term group camping trip, but without the s'mores and with a much higher risk of, well, everything. Daily routines were dictated by the grim realities of war and the limitations of underground existence. You would often start your day not with breakfast, but with a period of vigilance. Listen, what do you hear from above? Footsteps, Voices, the familiar whir of helicopter blades, even seemingly innocuous sounds could mean danger. Then, if the coast was clear, perhaps a quick trip to the surface, always under the cover of dense vegetation, to relieve yourself or collect water. For cooking, it was often done during the night, with the smoke carefully vented through those ingenious, miles-long systems disguised as ant hills. This kept the air relatively breathable underground, but even then, the lingering scent of cooked rice or stew was a constant reminder of shared, confined existence. A mainstream historical fact, life in the Ku Chi tunnels was characterized by extreme deprivation and constant exposure to disease due to cramped conditions, poor sanitation, and lack of sunlight. Malaria, dysentery, and parasitic infections were rampant. You'd often be battling illness while simultaneously trying to evade detection from a vastly superior enemy. It puts your worst sick day ever into perspective, doesn't it? Then there's the food. It was often simple, sparse, and repetitive. Steamed rice, supplemented by whatever roots, leaves, or occasional small animals could be found on the surface. Fresh water was a precious commodity, often collected from secret wells or filtered from underground streams. You learn to appreciate every mouthful, every drop, because you know how precarious your supply chain is. Forget your fancy coffee shop latte. You'd kill for a glass of clean, cool water down here. Here's a quirky tidbit about their diet. To supplement their meager rations and combat the lack of fresh greens, tunnel inhabitants would sometimes consume wild plants and even certain insects and roots found in the jungle, some of which had surprising nutritional value or medicinal properties. It was the ultimate farm-to-table experience. If your farm was a booby-trapped jungle and your table was a patch of dirt, historians still argue whether the comprehensive knowledge of local flora and fauna for survival was a formally taught skill across the NLF, or if it was predominantly a legacy of generations of indigenous knowledge passed down through local communities, adapted to the extreme circumstances. Despite the hardships, life wasn't entirely devoid of social interaction or even moments of levity. You might find yourself sharing stories in hushed whispers, playing a quiet game of cards, or even singing soft, defiant songs. There were classrooms for children, small spaces where basic literacy and revolutionary ideals were taught. You see the resilience in the human spirit, adapting to the most inhumane conditions. They weren't just soldiers, they were mothers, fathers, children, living a shadow existence, yet clinging to a semblance of normal life. The psychological toll, however, was immense. The constant darkness, the pervasive dampness, the feeling of being buried alive, it chipped away at even the strongest minds. Claustrophobia was a constant companion. Imagine never seeing the sun, never feeling a fresh breeze for weeks or even months at a time. It's enough to make you crave a wide open field, even one with a few landmines. The lack of light, in particular, was a significant challenge. You rely on dim oil lamps or crude, battery powered flashlights, carefully conserving precious energy. Your eyes adapt to the perpetual twilight, but the longing for natural light, for the vastness of the sky, is a deep, aching void. It's like living in a permanent sleepover with 200 of your closest friends, except no one brought a tent and there are bombs outside. Yet, amidst all this, the tunnels were a place of strategic rest and preparation. Fighters would rotate between periods above ground, engaging in guerrilla actions, and periods below ground, recovering, training, and preparing for the next mission. It was a cycle of intense activity and profound quiet, a testament to the discipline and dedication required to sustain such a unique form of warfare. You are witnessing a remarkable form of human adaptation, pushing the boundaries of what is possible when survival is the ultimate goal. After enduring the claustrophobic realities of daily life within the Q Chai tunnels, your awareness now sharpens to the chilling ingenuity of their defensive mechanisms. This wasn't just a place to live, it was a fortress, booby trapped and designed to inflict maximum psychological and physical damage on any intruder. You're now navigating a landscape where every step could be your last, and every seemingly innocuous patch of jungle floor hides a deadly secret. The primary line of defense, beyond the sheer difficulty of finding the entrances, was an array of incredibly diverse and often horrifying booby traps. These weren't sophisticated, high tech devices, they were brutal, low tech, and incredibly effective, relying on local materials and a deep understanding of human anatomy and psychology. Think of them as the original smart home security system, but instead of alerting the police, they just, well, let's just say, you wouldn't be getting your security deposit back. You learn about the infamous punji sticks, sharpened bamboo or metal stakes, often tipped with venom or fecal matter to ensure infection, concealed in pits covered with leaves and grass. Imagine stepping through seemingly normal jungle only to feel a sudden, agonizing stab as your foot plunges into a hidden pit, impaling you on one of these silent, deadly spears. It's not the kind of spike strip you see in movies. It's far more insidious and designed for slow, painful incapacitation rather than instant death. Then there were the various types of trapdoors and pivoting gates inside the tunnels. You might be crawling through a seemingly clear section, only for a hidden door to swing shut behind you, sealing you in. Or perhaps a section of the floor pivots, dropping you onto a bed of punji sticks or into a pit with snakes. The sideways trapdoor, for instance, was a particularly nasty one. You'd be crawling through a tight passage, only for a section of the wall to suddenly fall away, sending you plummeting into a spiked pit. It's like a funhouse, if the funhouse was designed by someone who really, really disliked you. A mainstream historical fact here is that the NLF's widespread use of booby traps was a deliberate strategy to compensate for their lack of heavy firepower and to psychologically wear down enemy forces. These traps didn't necessarily kill many soldiers outright, but they inflicted countless injuries, tied up vast medical resources, and most importantly, instilled a pervasive sense of fear and paranoia that significantly slowed down enemy movements and degraded morale. Every step in the jungle became a terrifying calculation. You also discover the more creative uses of local wildlife. While less common than the manufactured traps, there are tales of scorpion pits or even venomous snake traps strategically placed. You'd stumble, fall, and find yourself face to face with a cobra. It's not just scary, it's the kind of thing that makes you question every leaf every branch, every shadow. This quirky tidbit about using local fauna as defensive allies really highlights the deep understanding of the environment and the desperate creativity born from necessity. Imagine going to war and the local wildlife is literally weaponized against you. That's a whole new level of nature hates you. Historians still argue whether the primary objective of these booby traps was to cause casualties or to instill psychological terror and slow down enemy operations. Some scholars lean towards the latter, suggesting that making every single step a potential death trap was more effective in draining morale and resources than trying to achieve high body counts with limited resources. Others contend that the pain and suffering caused were a direct, if gruesome, objective to deter further aggression. Beyond the traps, the very design of the tunnels served as a defense. The narrow passages, barely wide enough for a small Vietnamese person, were a nightmare for larger American soldiers. You'd find yourself getting stuck, unable to turn around, and completely vulnerable. The multiple layers and false tunnels were also critical. You might discover a tunnel entrance, follow it for a while, only to find yourself at a dead end, or worse, in a chamber specifically designed for an ambush. It's a literal maze, but with far higher stakes than just getting lost in a cornfield. The NLF also employed gas traps, crude but effective. They would seal off a section of the tunnel and then pump in tear gas or other irritants, forcing intruders out or incapacitating them. You feel the burning sensation in your eyes, the scratch in your throat, the desperate urge to escape the confined space. These defenses were not just physical barriers, they were an extension of the psychological warfare waged against the enemy. They turned the ground itself into an active combatant, fighting back with every hidden spike, every concealed pit, every unexpected turn. The sheer unpredictability of these defenses was their greatest strength. You never knew what you were going to encounter or where. It was a constant game of cat and mouse, but the mouse was the one building the traps. And you, my friend, are right in the middle of it. Take a deep breath, if you can, because the next section introduces the brave, or perhaps foolhardy, individuals who dared to enter this deadly maze. Having experienced the chilling efficacy of the Q Chai Tunnel's booby traps, you now encounter the individuals who dared to face them head on, the tunnel rats. These weren't your typical infantry soldiers. They were a special breed, volunteers, who possessed a unique blend of courage, claustrophobia, defying determination, and let's be honest, probably a few screws loose. Their mission? To plunge into the dark, suffocating confines of the Viet Cong's underground world, clear it out, and disrupt its operations. It was a job tailor-made for a horror movie, except it was brutally, terrifyingly real. Imagine yourself standing at the edge of a tiny, barely discernible hole in the ground. The humid jungle air above is thick, but the air wafting up from the depths of that hole feels different, stale, earthy, and hinting at unknown dangers. You're typically smaller than the average American soldier, perhaps because a larger frame simply wouldn't fit. You strip down to your fatigues, shed your bulky equipment, and arm yourself with little more than a .45 caliber pistol, a flashlight, and a knife. Maybe a gas mask, if you're lucky. Your mission brief is simple. Enter the hole, find the enemy, and eliminate them. Sounds easy, right? It was anything but. A mainstream historical fact: the tunnel rats were specialized combat engineers and infantrymen, predominantly from the U.S. Army and Australian forces, tasked with searching, clearing, and destroying enemy tunnel systems. They operated alone or in small teams, relying on their wits, courage, and a healthy dose of pure grit. This was not a glamorous job. It was a dirty, terrifying, and often thankless task that pushed the boundaries of human endurance. As you lower yourself into the blackness, head first, you immediately feel the earth close in around you. The passage is incredibly narrow, sometimes so tight you have to exhale to squeeze through. The air becomes heavy, humid, and stale, reeking of damp soil, sweat, and something else, something you can't quite place. You move forward by pulling yourself with your elbows and knees, inch by agonizing inch. The darkness is absolute, broken only by the narrow beam of your flashlight, which seems to swallow the light rather than illuminate the way. It's like trying to find your car keys in a completely unlit cave after a particularly spicy meal. Here's a quirky tidbit. To navigate the pitch black and alert themselves to potential dangers, some tunnel rats developed an almost preternatural sense of touch and hearing. They'd often move with one hand extended, feeling for tripwires, changes in the tunnel's texture, or hidden openings. Others claimed they could literally smell the enemy, detecting the scent of a different brand of cigarette or a different type of cooking fuel, which could betray a hidden chamber. Your nose becomes your best friend or your worst enemy, depending on what it sniffs out. Historians still argue whether the psychological profiling for tunnel rat volunteers truly identified a specific personality type, resistant to claustrophobia and fear, or if it was more about simple physical size and immediate availability of personnel willing to undertake such perilous missions. The dangers are immediate and constant. You're not just looking for the enemy, you're looking for booby traps. Remember those punji sticks? Or the hidden pits from the last section? You're now crawling right over them, hoping your flashlight beam catches the glint of a tripwire or the subtle disturbance in the dirt that reveals a hidden trapdoor. Every shadow seems to conceal a threat. Every distant rustle could be a hidden NLF fighter. You move slowly, methodically, every muscle tense, your heart pounding a frantic rhythm against your ribs. Encounters with the enemy in these cramped spaces were brutal and terrifying. There's no room for complex maneuvers, no cover. It's often a desperate, point blank struggle in the dark, where the advantage goes to whoever adapts quickest to the close quarters, claustrophobic environment. A single shot can echo deafeningly, temporarily blinding you with the muzzle flash. The sounds of combat are muffled by the earth, but the immediacy of the threat is overwhelming. The psychological toll on these soldiers was immense. Imagine the constant fear of being trapped, of running out of air, of facing an unseen enemy in a space so small you can barely defend yourself. Many tunnel rats suffered from severe psychological trauma long after the war, haunted by the crushing darkness and the lurking dangers of their underground missions. It's not the kind of thing you just shake off with a good night's sleep and a warm cup of cocoa. Yet, despite the horrors, these individuals played a crucial role. Their dangerous work forced the NLF to constantly adjust their tunnel designs to make them even more complex and harder to penetrate. They destroyed vital supply caches, captured crucial intelligence, and at times directly engaged and eliminated enemy personnel. You are witnessing the courage of individuals who literally walked into the belly of the beast, pushing the limits of human bravery in one of the most terrifying combat environments imaginable. Emerging from the harrowing close quarters of the tunnel rat experience, you now turn your attention to the broader canvas of tactics employed in tunnel warfare. This wasn't just about who could dig deeper or crawl faster. It was a complex chess match played beneath the jungle floor, where both the NLF and the American forces developed unique strategies to gain an advantage in this invisible realm. You're observing a fascinating clash of conventional might against unconventional ingenuity. For the National Liberation Front, the tunnels were their strategic masterpiece. Their primary tactic was surprise and evasion. You learn to launch lightning fast ambushes from hidden tunnel entrances, strike at vulnerable American patrols, and then simply vanish back into the earth, leaving bewildered and frustrated enemy forces behind. It's like a game of whack-a-mole, except the moles are armed and exceptionally good at disappearing acts. They controlled the tempo and location of engagements, turning the jungle itself into a weapon. They didn't need to defeat the Americans in open battle. They just needed to survive, inflict casualties, and wear down their morale. A mainstream historical fact, the NLF effectively used the Kuchi tunnels to maintain a persistent presence directly under major American military bases, including the sprawling Lai and Kuchi bases. This allowed them to launch mortar and rocket attacks with devastating surprise, disrupting operations and forcing American troops into a constant state of high alert. Imagine having an enemy living literally beneath your barracks, popping up to shell your mess hall before disappearing again. It's enough to make you double check your floorboards at night. The NLF also perfected techniques for moving supplies and personnel entirely underground. You witness the careful transport of ammunition, food, and even wounded fighters through the narrow passages, often for miles. This intricate underground logistics chain defied American attempts to cut off supply lines, making bombing campaigns and interdiction efforts far less effective. They had their own subterranean highway system, while the Americans were stuck on the surface, battling booby traps and the unforgiving jungle. Here's a quirky tidbit about NLF ingenuity. To counter attempts by American forces to detect their tunnels using dogs, the NLF reportedly spread American soap or even used captured U.S. uniforms near tunnel entrances. This supposedly confused the highly trained scent dogs, making them less effective at sniffing out hidden openings. It's like trying to fool a bloodhound with a fancy cologne. Sometimes it actually works. Historians still argue whether these specific countermeasures were consistently effective or largely anecdotal, given the varying success rates of American dog handlers. On the American side, the response to the tunnels was a continuous, often frustrating, learning process. Their initial tactics were brute force, land clearing operations, involved using massive M48 tanks to literally rip open the ground, trying to expose tunnels. You hear the grinding roar of the tanks, the tearing of earth as they attempt to literally rip the bandages off the Earth's hidden wounds. They also employed roam plows, huge tractors with sharp blades, to clear vast swathes of jungle, hoping to destroy tunnel entrances and deny the NLF cover. It was an environmental disaster in the making, and often the tunnels simply went deeper, or the entrances were too well hidden to be affected. Then came the tunnel rats, as you remember, but even they operated under severe limitations. The tunnels were too narrow for most American soldiers, making clearing them a slow, dangerous, and resource intensive process. They faced constant threats from booby traps, ambushes, and the psychological torment of the claustrophobic darkness. It was a bit like trying to catch a mosquito in a dark room with a sledgehammer. Messy, inefficient, and often you just ended up hitting yourself. The Americans also resorted to flooding tunnels with water or pumping in tear gas and CS gas, a type of riot control agent, to try and force out the NLF fighters. You might feel the burning in your eyes, the desperate gasp for fresh air as the gas begins to fill the confined space. However, the NLF quickly adapted, designing sections that could be easily sealed off, or creating new ventilation shafts. Sometimes, the gas simply dispersed harmlessly or was blown back towards the American troops by unpredictable underground air currents. Historians still debate the overall effectiveness of American anti-tunnel tactics. While they caused localized disruptions and forced the NLF to expend considerable effort on repair and redigging, it's argued whether these tactics ever truly crippled the vast and resilient QChi network on a strategic level. The tunnels remained a persistent problem throughout the war, a testament to their inherent design and the adaptive spirit of those who built and lived in them. You see the stark contrast. The NLF, with limited resources, used the very terrain to their advantage, creating an invisible sanctuary. The Americans, with overwhelming technological superiority, struggled to find and destroy an enemy that melted into the earth. It was a new kind of war, played largely in the dark, and the rules were being written, quite literally, as they went along. As you navigate the invisible corridors and recall the desperate struggles within the Kuchi tunnels, a new, pervasive element begins to press in on you: the psychological toll. This wasn't just a physical battlefield, it was a war waged on the minds of the soldiers, particularly those on the American and Allied side, who found themselves battling an unseen, elusive enemy that could strike from anywhere and vanish into the very ground beneath their feet. Imagine the sheer frustration. You're a soldier, trained in conventional warfare, expecting to confront an enemy on a defined front line. Instead, you're in a dense, humid jungle where every rustle of leaves, every shadow, every quiet moment could conceal a hidden entrance, a deadly booby trap, or a camouflaged sniper. You can shell an area for hours, drop bombs, and still, the enemy emerges, seemingly unscathed, to attack again. It's like trying to squash a mosquito with a hammer, but the mosquito keeps disappearing into the floorboards and buzzing right back into your ear. This constant uncertainty bred a profound sense of paranoia and fear. You walk through the jungle, your senses on high alert, scanning for tripwires, for disturbed earth, for anything that seems out of place. Every step becomes a conscious act, a gamble. You can't relax, not for a moment. This relentless vigilance, the feeling that danger could erupt from any direction, even from below, was utterly draining. It wore down even the most seasoned soldiers, eroding their confidence and their will to fight. A mainstream historical fact. The psychological impact of guerrilla warfare, particularly the unseen and unpredictable nature of the Viet Cong operating from tunnel systems, was a major factor contributing to widespread combat stress and low morale among American troops. The traditional rules of engagement simply didn't apply, leaving soldiers feeling constantly vulnerable and disoriented. It was a war without clear lines, fought against shadows. You start to question everything: the intelligence briefings, the maps, the very ground you're standing on. Is that village truly pacified, or are there tunnels beneath it waiting to unleash an attack? Is that farmer tending his field genuinely innocent, or is he a Viet Cong sympathizer who knows every hidden entry point? This blurring of civilian and combatant lines, facilitated by the tunnels, amplified the psychological strain. It made trust almost impossible and suspicion a constant companion. Here's a quirky tidbit that illustrates this paranoia. Some American soldiers would report hearing strange noises coming from underground at night, even beneath their own bases. These sounds, muffled voices, faint movements, fueled rumors of vast, undetectable networks directly beneath their feet, creating a sense of being perpetually surrounded and infiltrated. While some of these might have been imagined, the sheer psychological pressure often made them feel terrifyingly real. Historians still argue whether the widespread belief among American troops that tunnels existed directly under major U.S. base perimeters was largely a psychological phenomenon, or if there were indeed isolated, undiscovered NLF tunnels stretching that far. The experience of the tunnel rats, which you recalled earlier, takes this psychological torment to an even more intense level. Imagine descending into absolute darkness, knowing that at any moment you could face a booby trap, an armed enemy in a cramped space, or simply become hopelessly lost and suffocate. The claustrophobia, the fear of the unknown, the constant smell of decay and damp earth. It pushed many to their breaking point. It was a voluntary trip into hell. Day after day, the NLF actively exploited this psychological warfare. They understood that fear and uncertainty could be as potent as any bullet or bomb. By launching surprise attacks, disappearing without a trace, and creating an environment where danger lurked everywhere. They eroded the enemy's will to fight. They used the tunnels not just as physical shelters, but as instruments of psychological torment. It was a masterclass in asymmetric warfare, turning the very environment into a weapon against a technologically superior adversary. You might find yourself starting to jump at shadows, flinching at unexpected sounds. Sleep becomes restless, haunted by images of dark, confined spaces. The jungle itself, once perhaps seen as exotic, transforms into a malevolent entity, hiding countless unseen threats. This profound mental strain often led to severe post-traumatic stress among soldiers, long after their tours of duty ended. The war in Vietnam wasn't just fought with bullets and bombs. It was fought in the minds of the men on both sides, a silent, invisible battle that left lasting scars. As the psychological toll of the Q-Chi tunnels weighs heavily, you now witness the desperate efforts by the American forces to neutralize this elusive subterranean threat. Faced with an enemy that simply melted into the earth, conventional military tactics often fell short, leading to a series of escalating, often futile, countermeasures. You're observing a technological giant attempting to swat a mosquito that lives underground, a task far harder than it sounds. The initial American response, as you might recall, was brute force. You see massive Rome plows, enormous bulldozers fitted with razor-sharp blades, tearing through the dense jungle. Their objective? To literally rip open the ground, exposing tunnels and denying the NLF their protective canopy. The roar of these machines is deafening as they systematically clear swaths of land, turning vibrant jungle into scarred earth. This created free fire zones, areas supposedly cleared of enemy presence. However, the NLF simply adapted. Tunnels were dug deeper, or entrances were constructed in areas still covered by thick foliage just outside the cleared zones. It was like trying to clean your room with a leaf blower. Lots of noise and dust, but the mess just gets pushed to another corner. Then came the heavy ordnance. You hear the earth-shattering explosions of B-52 bombers dropping massive loads of bombs, often referred to as carpet bombing. The ground trembles beneath you, and you can only imagine the sheer devastation above. These raids were designed to collapse tunnels and incinerate everything on the surface. While they did cause significant damage and forced the NLF to spend immense effort on repairs, the sheer depth and resilient construction of the main tunnel systems often allowed them to survive. It was like trying to crush an ant with a bowling ball. You might destroy the ant farm, but the ants just rebuild, often deeper. A mainstream historical fact. Despite massive bombing campaigns and extensive land clearing operations, the American hideout forces were never able to fully neutralize or destroy the Ku-Chi tunnel system throughout the war. This highlights the incredible resilience of the tunnels and the adaptive nature of the NLF's guerrilla warfare tactics. It was a constant battle of adaptation, and the tunnels always seemed to be one step ahead. Beyond the brute force, more targeted approaches were tried. You see attempts at tunnel flooding. Helicopters would ferry in massive water bladders, attempting to pump water into known tunnel entrances, hoping to drown out or flush out the occupants. Sometimes this worked, forcing NLF fighters to abandon sections or bringing their hidden caches to the surface. But often, the NLF had built clever water traps and diversion channels, or simply sealed off sections, allowing the water to drain harmlessly or be contained. It was like trying to water a plant through a really tiny, complicated straw. Then came the chemical warfare, particularly the use of CS gas, a potent tear gas. You witness American troops deploying canisters, pumping the gas into tunnel openings, hoping to incapacitate or drive out the NLF. The acrid smell burns your nostrils, even from a distance. However, as you might recall from our earlier discussion, the NLF had developed effective countermeasures. They sealed off sections with trapdoors, used their intricate ventilation systems to disperse the gas or simply wore crude gas masks made from soaked rags. This quirky tidbit about homemade gas masks is a powerful reminder of their resourcefulness. They weren't just digging, they were innovating with whatever they had. Historians still argue whether the long-term health effects of widespread exposure to CS gas on both NLF fighters and local civilians were adequately understood or addressed during and after the conflict. The very concept of the tunnel rats was, in itself, a desperate countermeasure. As you experienced, sending men into those dark, confined spaces was a high-risk, low-reward endeavor, often yielding little strategic gain for the individual danger faced. Many operations were launched, and tunnels were indeed found and sometimes destroyed with explosives. But the vastness of the network meant that for every tunnel cleared, dozens more remained, or new ones were quickly dug. You witnessed the growing frustration among American commanders. The tunnels made it almost impossible to achieve a decisive victory. How do you defeat an enemy you can't find? How do you bomb a ghost? The terrain itself became an antagonist, an endless, booby-trapped labyrinth. The sheer cost in terms of manpower, equipment, and psychological strain to counter the tunnels was immense, out of all proportion to the NLF's investment in building them. These countermeasures, while often intense and destructive, ultimately failed to dismantle the Q-Chi tunnel system as a whole. They forced adaptations, they caused hardship, but they never truly broke the NLF's hold on this vital underground sanctuary. The tunnels remained a testament to the idea that ingenuity and determination, even with limited resources, could effectively defy overwhelming military might. You are seeing the limits of conventional power against an unconventional, deeply entrenched enemy. Having witnessed the frustrating American attempts to neutralize the Q-Chi tunnels, you now shift your perspective to a pivotal moment in the war, one where the tunnels played an absolutely crucial, if often overlooked role. The Tet Offensive of 1968. This was a turning point, a massive and surprising assault that fundamentally altered the perception of the war, both in Vietnam and back home in the United States. And right at its heart, like a hidden circulatory system, were the Q-Chi tunnels. Imagine the atmosphere in early 1968. There was a general sense, largely promoted by American military command, that the Viet Cong and North Vietnamese Army, NVA, were weakening, their ability to launch major offensives severely degraded. The U.S. narrative was one of progress, of winning the hearts and minds, and of turning the tide. This created a false sense of security, particularly during the Tet holiday, the Vietnamese Lunar New Year, which traditionally saw a ceasefire. But beneath this veneer of optimism, a colossal, audacious plan was being meticulously prepared, largely facilitated by the very tunnels you've been exploring. The Tet Offensive was a series of surprise attacks launched by the NLF and NVA on over 100 towns and cities across South Vietnam, including Saigon itself, beginning on January 30th, 1968. This was a mainstream historical fact that shocked the world. The scale and coordination of the Tet Offensive disproved claims that the Viet Cong were on the verge of defeat, shattering American public confidence in the war. It wasn't just a few skirmishes, it was a nationwide uprising, a full frontal assault on urban centers. You see how the tunnels became indispensable for this operation. For weeks, even months, before the offensive, vast quantities of weapons, ammunition, food, and personnel were secretly moved into position. In the Kuchai district, this meant utilizing the sprawling tunnel network to infiltrate forces right to the outskirts of Saigon, often directly beneath major American and South Vietnamese installations. Imagine the sheer audacity, thousands of fighters, tons of supplies, all moving invisibly right under the noses of the enemy. It was like a giant, deadly, underground smuggling ring. The tunnels served as assembly points, staging areas, and fallback positions. Fighters could emerge from hidden hatches, launch their attacks, and then retreat back into the earth, if met with heavy resistance, reappearing later to fight another day. This hit and run capability, perfected through years of tunnel warfare, was crucial to the NLF's ability to sustain the offensive for weeks in some areas, despite heavy losses. Without the tunnels, such a widespread and sustained urban assault would have been logistically impossible. Here's a quirky tidbit. During the Tet Offensive, some NLF units actually used sections of the Q-Chi tunnels to approach and infiltrate the U.S. Embassy compound in Saigon, while they only managed to breach the outer walls and were eventually repelled. The very fact that they could get so close to the symbolic heart of American power in Vietnam using underground routes sent shivers down the spines of U.S. officials. It was like discovering your house is built on a secret network of mole tunnels, and those moles just tried to order room service. Historians still argue whether the primary strategic goal of the Tet Offensive was to spark a popular uprising among the South Vietnamese people, or to achieve a psychological victory by demonstrating the NLF's undiminished strength and demoralizing the American public. The impact of the Tet Offensive, and by extension, the tunnel's role in it, was profound. While militarily, the NLF suffered heavy casualties and did not hold any major cities long term, the psychological victory was undeniable. The graphic images of fighting in the heart of Saigon, broadcast on television screens worldwide, completely contradicted the optimistic reports from the U.S. military. You feel the disillusionment setting in, the questioning of official narratives. If the enemy was so weak, how could they launch such a massive, coordinated attack? The tunnels in Kuchi, though not the only tunnel systems involved, became a powerful symbol of the NLF's resilience and the sheer difficulty of fighting this kind of war. They represented the hidden strength, the tenacity, and the ability to defy overwhelming technological superiority. The Tet Offensive demonstrated that even with all the American might, the NLF could strike anywhere, anytime, thanks in no small part to their invisible underground lifeline. You realize that the war wasn't just about bombs and bullets anymore. It was about perception, about willpower, and about who could endure the longest. The tunnels had allowed the NLF to prepare, launch, and sustain an offensive that shattered the narrative of an easy victory. It was a strategic shockwave, felt from the rice paddies of Vietnam all the way to the living rooms of America, and the subtle, earthen veins of Cu Chi were pumping the blood that made it all possible. Stepping away from the grand strategic implications of the Tet Offensive, you now focus on an equally compelling, yet often overshadowed, aspect of the Q Chai tunnels, the civilian life that flourished within their hidden depths. This wasn't just a military base. For many ordinary Vietnamese people, these tunnels became their homes, their schools, and their sanctuaries from the brutal realities of a war waged on the surface. You're witnessing the incredible human capacity to adapt, to endure, and to build a semblance of normal existence in the most abnormal of circumstances. Imagine being a child in Cu Chi during the height of the war. Your playground wasn't a sunny field. It was a dark, confined tunnel. Your classroom was a small, earthen chamber lit by a flickering oil lamp. The sounds of distant shelling or passing helicopters were your lullabies. Children were born in these tunnels, grew up in them, and learned the intricate pathways and hidden dangers of their underground world as instinctively as you might learn your way around your own house. It's a surreal thought, isn't it? Like playing hide and seek, where home base is 10 meters underground and the seeker has bombs. Life for these civilians was a constant balancing act between the necessities of daily living and the ever present threat from above. You observe mothers caring for their infants, carefully muzzling cries lest they betray their position. You see families sharing meager meals, often cooked in those ingeniously vented kitchens, the aroma of rice and simple vegetables, a small comfort in the suffocating darkness. It was a life of quiet resilience, marked by ingenuity and a profound sense of community. A mainstream historical fact: tens of thousands of Vietnamese civilians lived in or regularly used the Cu Chi tunnels for shelter during the Vietnam War, often for extended periods, fleeing the relentless bombing and ground operations above. These were not just fighters, they were farmers, teachers, elders, and children, all caught in the unforgiving machinery of war. Their survival became intertwined with the very fabric of the tunnels. The tunnels weren't just a physical refuge, they became a cultural and social hub. You might see small, informal schools where teachers, using what few supplies they had, would educate the children. There were rudimentary medical stations, staffed by local doctors and nurses, where basic first aid and sometimes even surgery was performed under the most challenging conditions. You witness the sheer determination to maintain some semblance of normalcy, to preserve culture and knowledge amidst chaos. Here's a quirky tidbit about resourcefulness. Lacking proper medical supplies, civilian tunnel inhabitants often relied on traditional herbal medicine, concocting remedies from jungle plants to treat everything from malaria to infections. They became experts in ethnobotany out of sheer necessity. It's the ultimate natural pharmacy, proving that sometimes grandma's remedies are truly battle tested. Historians still argue whether the organizational structure within the civilian tunnel communities was entirely self governing and spontaneous, or if it was heavily influenced and guided by the NLF political cadres who also operated from these networks. Despite the collective spirit, the psychological toll on civilians was immense. The constant darkness led to vitamin D deficiencies and skin ailments. The damp, unsanitary conditions contributed to widespread diseases, and the mental strain of living underground, never knowing when the next bombing raid would shake your world, was a profound burden. Imagine the terror of an earthquake, but it's a daily occurrence, and it's caused by deliberate acts from above. Yet you see moments of profound humanity. People shared what little they had, offering comfort and support to their neighbors. Stories were told, songs were sung softly, and the bonds of community were forged in the crucible of shared hardship. The tunnels became a symbol not just of military resistance, but of civilian resilience, a testament to the fact that even when their homes above ground were destroyed, their spirit and their lives could continue below. The relationship between the civilian population and the NLF fighters within the tunnels was complex and symbiotic. The civilians provided vital support, food, intelligence, labor for digging and repairs, while the tunnels offered protection and a sense of shared purpose. You realize that the war was fought not just by armies, but by entire communities, adapting and resisting in ways unimaginable to conventional forces. You are seeing a hidden side of history, a narrative often lost amidst the larger battles and political machinations. It's the story of everyday people pushed to extraordinary limits who found a way to live, love, and hope even in the deepest shadows of war. Their quiet courage is as profound as any soldier's bravery on the battlefield. From the personal struggles of civilian life in the tunnels, your perspective now widens to encompass how the Cu Chi tunnels became a powerful tool in the broader game of propaganda and psychological warfare. This wasn't just a physical conflict, it was a battle for hearts and minds, a war of narratives, and the tunnels themselves became a potent symbol wielded by both sides to influence public opinion and bolster morale. For the National Liberation Front, the tunnels were the ultimate symbol of their resilience, ingenuity, and unwavering commitment to independence. You see how they meticulously cultivated this image. Radio broadcasts from clandestine stations deep within the tunnels would relay stories of successful ambushes and incredible feats of survival, painting a picture of an indomitable force that could not be defeated. Flyers and pamphlets, sometimes printed on makeshift presses underground, celebrated the bravery of those living and fighting in the earth. It was a narrative of the Davids against the Goliaths, with the tunnels serving as their secret slingshot. A mainstream historical fact, the NLF consistently used the existence and effectiveness of the Cu Chi tunnels as a potent propaganda tool, both domestically and internationally, to demonstrate their ability to resist overwhelming American firepower. They presented the tunnels as proof of Vietnamese ingenuity and a spirit of defiance that even the most powerful military in the world could not overcome. It was a clear message. You may control the sky, but we control the ground beneath your feet. You can almost hear the whispered stories, passed from village to village, of soldiers disappearing into thin air, only to reappear miles away. These tales, sometimes embellished, sometimes chillingly accurate, reinforced the mythical quality of the tunnels. They created a sense of awe and pride among supporters, convincing them that victory was achievable through cunning and perseverance. It was like a real-life superhero lair, except the superheroes were farmers and ordinary citizens, and their superpower was digging really, really well. Here's a quirky tidbit. The NLF even used the tunnels to host clandestine meetings with foreign journalists and anti-war activists who were secretly brought into the liberated zones. Imagine being a Western reporter crawling through dark, cramped tunnels, only to emerge into a surprisingly functional underground command center. These carefully orchestrated visits provided powerful first-hand accounts that contradicted the official U.S. narrative, shaping international opinion and fueling the anti-war movement back home. Historians still argue whether the NLF's strategic decision to allow limited access for certain foreign observers into the tunnels during the war was a calculated risk that paid off significantly in terms of international public relations, or if it also posed security risks that were sometimes underestimated. On the American side, the tunnels presented a massive propaganda problem. Initially, U.S. military leaders downplayed their significance, dismissing them as primitive holes. But as operations continued and the tunnels proved their strategic value, the narrative shifted to one of frustration and condemnation. You see, American military publications attempting to dehumanize the tunnel dwellers, portraying them as subhuman gooks who lived in squalor. They tried to frame the tunnels as symbols of a barbaric, uncivilized enemy, rather than acknowledging the incredible ingenuity behind them. However, this often backfired. The sheer scale and resilience of the tunnels eventually became undeniable, even to the American public. The stories from tunnel rats about the claustrophobic horror, the booby traps, and the sheer difficulty of clearing these networks, while terrifying, also inadvertently highlighted the NLF's incredible determination. It became clear that this wasn't just a small, easily defeated foe. It was an enemy, deeply entrenched and incredibly resourceful. The image of the tunnels became a powerful metaphor for the entire Vietnam War, a conflict fought in the shadows against an elusive enemy that could never be truly pinned down or defeated by conventional means. You feel the slow erosion of public confidence as the American narrative of swift victory crumbled under the weight of reality. The tunnels were tangible proof that despite all the technology and firepower, the enemy was still there, still fighting, and still living, literally, beneath their feet. In essence, the Cu Chi tunnels became a silent, earthen megaphone in the propaganda war. For the NLF, they broadcast a message of unbreakable will and clever resistance. For the US, they became an embarrassing symbol of an elusive enemy and a war that refused to be won. You are observing how physical structures built for survival transcended their original purpose to become potent psychological weapons, shaping perceptions and ultimately influencing the course of history. Having explored how the Cu Chi tunnels became a potent weapon in the war of narratives, you now fast forward to a different era, the post-war legacy and remembrance of this extraordinary network. The guns have fallen silent, the bombs no longer shake the earth, but the tunnels remain, transformed from a battlefield into a profound symbol. You're witnessing how a site of immense suffering and strategic genius transitions into a place of reflection, education, and national pride. When the war ended in 1975, Vietnam faced immense challenges, but the Cu Chi tunnels were immediately recognized for their historical significance. They weren't just abandoned, they were preserved, becoming a powerful testament to the Vietnamese people's determination and sacrifice. You see the immediate efforts to secure the area, clear remaining ordnance, a dangerous and painstaking task, and begin the process of making parts of the network accessible for historical purposes. It was like finally opening up a deeply personal diary after years of conflict, sharing its secrets with the world. A mainstream historical fact. The Cu Chi tunnels were designated as a historical park and memorial site soon after the reunification of Vietnam, preserving them as a testament to the country's wartime ingenuity and resilience. This wasn't just a local decision, it was a national acknowledgement of their importance in the struggle for independence. The transformation wasn't just physical, it was symbolic. The tunnels, once a source of terror for one side and a lifeline for the other, began to be viewed as an enduring symbol of Vietnamese national pride and resistance against foreign aggression. You feel the weight of history in the damp air, the echoes of the struggles that took place here. It's a powerful reminder that even against overwhelming odds, a determined people can forge victory through ingenuity and sacrifice. Here's a quirky tidbit about the early preservation efforts. Local villagers who had helped dig and live in Ricin, the tunnels often became the first impromptu guides and caretakers. Their intimate, first-hand knowledge was invaluable in reconstructing the story and ensuring accuracy. Imagine your neighbor, who used to disappear underground, now giving you a guided tour of his wartime basement. Historians still argue whether the initial emphasis on military aspects of the tunnels overshadowed the equally important civilian experience within them during the early stages of their development as a historical site. The tunnels also became a place of somber remembrance. For the Vietnamese, it was a site to honor their fallen, to reflect on the immense sacrifices made for independence. For former adversaries, particularly American veterans, visiting the tunnels often became a profound experience, a chance to confront the reality of the war from the perspective of their former enemy. You see veterans, perhaps with haunted eyes, crawling through sections they once tried to destroy, gaining a new understanding of the formidable foe they faced. It's a potent, if silent, dialogue between past enemies, built on shared experiences of immense hardship. The preservation of the tunnels also ensured that the lessons of this unique form of warfare would not be lost. Military strategists, historians, and students from around the world began to study the Kuchai system, analyzing its effectiveness, its construction, and its psychological impact. It became a case study in asymmetric warfare, a textbook example of how a less technologically advanced force could effectively challenge a superpower. You realize that the tunnels are more than just dirt and cramped spaces. They are a living archive, a repository of human endurance, and a stark reminder of the costs of war. They tell a story not just of conflict, but of survival, adaptation, and the unwavering human spirit. It's a place where history is not just read in books, but felt in the cool, dark earth around you. And as you emerge from their depths, you carry with you a heavier understanding of the layers of memory and meaning embedded in this ground. From its solemn past as a battlefield and symbol, you now experience the Ku-chi tunnels in their present day incarnation, a vibrant, albeit sobering, tourist attraction and educational center. The echoes of war still linger, but they are now accompanied by the chatter of tourists, the clicks of cameras, and the voices of guides explaining a complex history. You're observing a powerful transformation where a site of conflict becomes a classroom for peace and understanding. Imagine arriving at the Ku-chi tunnels today. You're no longer sneaking through the jungle at night. You're part of a tour group, perhaps stepping off an air-conditioned bus. The entry is well marked, the paths clearly defined, and there are even gift shops selling souvenirs, miniature Ho Chi Minh sandals. Anyone. It's a surreal contrast to the desperate, clandestine existence you've been imagining. It's like visiting a theme park, but the rides are real historical structures, and the thrills come from confronting the past, a mainstream historical fact. The Cu Chi Tunnels complex today is one of Vietnam's most popular tourist destinations, attracting millions of visitors annually who come to experience the historical site firsthand. This massive influx of visitors helps fund its preservation and educates a global audience about the Vietnam War from a unique perspective. As you explore, you're given the opportunity to crawl through sections of the tunnels. Don't worry, these sections have been slightly widened and reinforced for modern visitors, so you probably won't get stuck like a full-grown American GI did back in the day. But even with the modifications, you still get a profound sense of the claustrophobia, the darkness, and the sheer physical challenge of navigating these subterranean passages. You hunch over, shuffle on your knees, and feel the cool earth pressing in. It's a vivid, albeit sanitized, taste of what it was like. You also see cleverly designed exhibits that recreate aspects of wartime life. There are mannequins depicting Viet Cong soldiers at work or rest, displays of the ingenious booby traps you learned about earlier, safely deactivated, thankfully, and even firing ranges where, for a fee, you can fire various authentic wartime weapons. Yes, you can literally fire an AK-47 in Cu-Chi. It's a quirky tidbit that adds an odd layer of historical immersion to the experience, though perhaps not everyone's idea of a relaxing historical outing. Historians still argue whether the commercialization of historical sites like Cu-Chi tunnels risks oversimplifying complex historical narratives, or if it effectively makes history accessible to a wider global audience. The site also serves a vital educational purpose. Guides, often former veterans or local residents who grew up during the war, provide context and personal stories. They explain the strategic significance of the tunnels, the daily hardships faced by those who lived there, and the ingenuity that went into their construction and defense. You learn about the resilience of the Vietnamese people, their determination to fight for independence, and the profound impact of the war on their lives. For many visitors, especially those from Western countries, a trip to Cu Chi is a powerful opportunity to learn about the Vietnam War from the Vietnamese perspective. It offers a counter narrative to what they might have learned back home, highlighting the deep commitment and sacrifice of the NLF and the local population. You might find yourself reflecting on the complexities of conflict, the human cost of war, and the different ways history is perceived depending on where you stand. As you emerge from the tunnels, blinking in the bright sunlight, you carry a newfound appreciation for the ingenuity and endurance of those who built and lived in this underground world. The experience is both fascinating and sobering, a tangible connection to a history that continues to resonate. It's a reminder that beneath the surface, even in places that seem quiet and ordinary, incredible stories of human struggle and triumph lie waiting to be discovered. As you step away from the physical tunnels and the immediate experience of their history, you are left to ponder the enduring lessons that the Q-Chi tunnels impart. This subterranean saga is far more than a historical curiosity. It's a profound case study in human resilience, asymmetric warfare, and the complex interplay of power and resistance. You are now reflecting on the echoes of the past that continue to resonate into the present, offering insights applicable far beyond the jungles of Vietnam. Perhaps the most prominent lesson is the sheer power of human ingenuity and adaptability in the face of overwhelming odds. You saw how a rural population, armed with simple tools and deep determination, could construct an underground network that defied the most advanced military technology of its time. It reminds you that true strength isn't always found in overwhelming firepower, but often in the cleverness, resourcefulness, and unyielding spirit of those committed to a cause. It's a humbling thought, isn't it, that sometimes the best defense is just a really, really good shovel and a whole lot of patience. A mainstream historical fact. The Cu-Chi tunnels serve as a prime example of successful asymmetric warfare, where a weaker force leverages unconventional tactics and terrain knowledge to effectively counter a technologically superior adversary. This concept has been studied by military strategists worldwide, influencing doctrines of guerrilla warfare and counterinsurgency for decades. Another crucial lesson lies in the psychological dimension of conflict. You experienced the pervasive fear and frustration inflicted upon American troops by an unseen enemy. The tunnels didn't just inflict physical casualties, they waged a constant battle for morale, forcing soldiers into a state of perpetual vigilance and anxiety. This highlights that warfare is fought not just on the battlefield, but in the minds of the combatants, and that psychological attrition can be as decisive as any conventional assault. It's a bit like a really bad dating experience, where the ghosting is actually happening from 30 feet underground. Here's a quirky tidbit to chew on. The success of the Q-Chi tunnels led some military theorists to ponder if future conflicts might increasingly move underground, forcing armies to develop new, subterranean combat doctrines. While largely confined to science fiction for now, the tunnels certainly opened up a speculative, downward dimension to modern warfare that rarely existed before. Historians still argue whether the long-term strategic success of the NLF, despite heavy casualties, was primarily due to the effectiveness of their guerrilla tactics like the tunnels, or if broader political and social factors were ultimately more decisive in the outcome of the war. The tunnels also offer a stark lesson on the limits of overwhelming force. Despite billions of dollars spent, millions of tons of bombs dropped, and countless troops deployed, The American military could not eliminate this persistent underground threat. It demonstrates that technological superiority alone cannot guarantee victory, especially when faced with an enemy deeply entrenched in their environment and supported by the local populace. It's a reminder that sometimes the biggest hammer isn't always the best tool for every nail, especially if that nail keeps retreating into the ground. Finally, the Suchai tunnels stand as a powerful symbol of national determination and sacrifice. For the Vietnamese people, they represent an unwavering commitment to independence and the willingness to endure unimaginable hardship for their homeland. Visiting the tunnels today is not just a historical tour, it's an encounter with a profound narrative of survival and triumph against all odds. It's a story that asks you to consider what you would be willing to endure for something you deeply believe in. As you drift now away from the jungle heat and the damp earth, let the intricate pathways and hidden chambers of Kuchi fade into the quiet corners of your mind. Remember the whispers of defiance, the ingenuity born of necessity, and the indomitable spirit that thrived in the darkest of places. The tunnels remind us that history isn't just about grand battles or famous leaders. It's also about the quiet, often unseen, acts of resilience performed by ordinary people. The dust settles, the echoes quiet. The lessons, however, remain etched not just in the earth of Ku Chai, but in the annals of human courage.